I don't want to kill myself anymore. I believe that I am capable of living independently, which is something that I did not believe when I was in the throes of addiction and the midst of rehab. I'm currently living proof of that. I don't sit in my bed and feel like the world is crashing around me. I barely remember anymore just how bad that feeling was.
Mm.
This addiction is very hard, like any addiction is. It's very painful to get through, but over time, it does eventually get easier. Life does get better. And you reach a place where you don't think about it anymore. You don't think about it as the thing affecting you, but you think about it as the thing that affected you. That's where I'm at now. And that is where anyone else who's going through it can and will eventually reach if they put in that work.
I'm Sherry Jonas, and this is Launch. My guest today is Elaine Uskoski. If that name sounds familiar, it's because she was on the podcast back in episode 24, where she shared her heartbreaking story with a very happy ending about how she rescued her son Jake from the throes of a video gaming addiction that nearly took his life. In fact, the voice you just heard was Jake, who shared what I think was one of the most honest and beautifully spoken responses to a deeply personal question. This time, Elaine's back to talk about something equally important: the detrimental effects of isolation on young adults. Recently, she wrote a blog post called How Isolation Can Breed Gaming Addiction, and we're going to dive into that today. Elaine is the author of several books, most notably Cyber Sober, A Caregiver's Guide to Video Gaming Addiction. You'll find links to her work and her contact information in the show notes. This is such an important conversation, so as you're listening, think about who in your life might need to hear it. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Let's get started. Elaine,
Yes, hello.
welcome back to Launch.
Thanks for having me again.
I'm excited to have you back. The last time you joined me, we were talking about video gaming addiction, specifically how you managed it once you realized that Jake was away at school and was struggling. And then what you did since that time in terms of becoming an author, a speaker, a coach. But for anyone who's listening to this, if they want to go back and listen to that episode, which was amazing, it's episode number 24. I understand that you're working on a third book.
I am.
So can you give us a little hint about what that is, what we can expect?
Yeah, the third book is the link between neurodiversity and video gaming addiction, because that seems to be showing up hugely with almost all of my clients. In fact, I'd say 98% of my gaming addicted clients have also ADHD, at the very least. And I think there's just not enough information for parents to understand how that plays into the addiction, but also how we parent a neurodiverse child, and how that can help maybe prevent addictions from happening when they feel they're being seen and understood. So yeah, that's coming up next. It's
And
still a
when,
work in progress.
okay, so there's no expected date when you think it'll be,
No,
okay.
no, no.
Well, it's a great topic, and I think it's going to do really, really well. The
Thank
fact
you.
that you're making these connections is huge. But today we're taking a deeper dive into addiction, but through the lens of isolation, because we both know that loneliness plays a huge role in fueling addiction. In fact, I feel so strongly personally about parents not letting their kids, their adult kids, stay in their rooms that I did an episode on it and talked about this famous rat park, which is episode 22. if anyone's interested. And recently, you wrote a blog post about it as well, which obviously we're going to talk about it, and I'll put it in the show notes. But so for our listener who's unfamiliar with the study, because we can't assume that everybody knows this study, I'm going to explain it quickly so parents can understand how dangerous isolation is for our kids. And not just for those who are gaming, but for every adult child who is spending hours upon hours in their bedrooms, whether they're scrolling on social media, watching Netflix, or on YouTube. This is for every kid that's in that bedroom. So here's the study. Back in the late 70s, I know you know this is for our listener. Back in the late 70s, Canadian psychologist, love that, Dr. Bruce Alexander noticed that all the classic addiction experiments were being done with rats who were kept alone in small cages with nothing else to do and no other rats to play with. So, to no one's surprise, these rats became addicted to the morphine laced water, and so he decided to try something different. He built Rat Park, which was a big social space, well, with all kinds of turning wheels and activities, and obviously clean water as well as the morphine laced water. And of course, he included other rats. Well, in that environment, the rats hardly touched the drug water, and even the rats that he had put in that were addicted stopped drinking the drug-laced water. And I mean, that's literally, it was the same drug, it was the same brain, but when he added social connection and stimulation, their addiction pretty much disappeared, which is why Dr. Alexander believes that addiction isn't just about personal weakness or brain chemistry, but about the environment. And we'll get into more of that. And since then, there have been a lot more studies suggesting that the cause of addiction may be more about socially disconnection, maybe more about being socially disconnected than the substance or abuse itself. So, Elaine, when you are coaching young adults who are addicted to video gaming, do you tell them about findings like this? Because I'm so curious what these young adults would say about a rat park study, for example.
Yeah, well, in my case, I work with parent coaching, so I am sharing the experiment with parents so that they have a better understanding. Um, at this point, I haven't really started to introduce that to the gamers. Um, the problem I have with introducing it to gamers is that they believe because they have video games and because they have online friends, they have all the stimulation and community they need in their rooms.
Mm.
And so it's really difficult to convince them that they are
Missing out.
not living in a rat park. I mean, they're not, because we do know we need in-person and a community, and we need outside stimulation, that we can't just live in isolation in a room with online friends and video games. That's not a life.
Mm.
Uh, but these guys, and I say guys because it's mostly males that I work with that are addicted to games, believe that that's all they need. They don't want outside friends, and they don't want education or jobs or sports or the arts or any other activity that they could find outside of their rooms. They're very stuck in that space. So I try to approach it from the parent perspective so I can get parents to understand the dilemma. And then I will give parents strategies on how to approach their gamer to introduce, why outside community and other activities is as important to them and their mental health.
So they're in the middle, they're in the thick of it. So they can't really see through the forest to see that there is a better life for themselves. But Jake, if we can touch on Jake for a second, he's out of the woods, so to speak. You've spoken to him about the Rat Park study?
I did, and in fact, I just interviewed him yesterday about it
Oh.
for one of the chapters in my book. And yeah, I had lots of questions for him. And yeah, he agreed that video games was the morphine drug for him, so to
Mm.
speak. And having gone through the addiction and been as isolated as he was for such a long period of time, he admits that part of the isolation was so that he didn't have to face the internal pain that he was going through. And so the isolation, the online friends gave him a sort of a coping mechanism.
Mm.
But now that he's, not gamed for 8 years and has a very full life and does everything in person, well, almost everything. Of course, he spends some time online, not gaming. But he now says, without his in-person friends, he wouldn't be the person that he is today. And
Mm.
that he, truly sees that community outside of the online world is immensely important. And one of the things we talked about was, when he was younger and I learned that he was online with friends, I would say to him, they're not your real friends. And he would get so upset with me. They are my real friends, Mom. He really believed they were. And now he says he can admit that he was wrong about that because when he decided to no longer game, those friends all disappeared. They were
Right.
not interested in his well-being. They just wanted to know when he was coming back to play video games. They weren't asking how he was doing. And he says in retrospect, they weren't really talking like friends talk anyway. Most of the conversation that was happening while gaming was related to the game itself. And he
Mm.
said he wasn't really sharing and being honest about his situation either. And one of the reasons that he avoided being in person with people is because he felt they would
Mm.
physically see he was struggling, and then he'd have to be vulnerable, and he didn't want to go there.
Right. Right. Um, there was a study done in 2019. I'm going to be making references to a few studies by the American Psychological Association that found that heavy gamers often feel that they are socially connected while they're gaming, to your point. But once they're offline, they report high levels of loneliness, poor sleep, and almost no real world support. So if heavy gamers feel so connected online, but lonely and unsupported offline, how can they believe that all of their needs are being met? And what about intimacy?
Well, one of the things that were interesting that Jake said yesterday was that if he were to admit that he was lonely and that he was miserable, then that would mean all the years that he dedicated to gaming would be a waste.
Mm.
He wasn't ready to admit that it was so important to him and it brought him such temporary joy. And we know it was temporary because, as you say, when they stop gaming, right, then they're really feeling their pain. But it gave him such joy and it allowed him to uh, avoid working on the internal problems that he was having, that he
Mm.
did not want to see that as a waste. He saw it as food. Whenever I talked about detox and gaming, he said it felt like I was removing food from him because he felt like he needed it to survive at times.
Right. But
And I work with a lot of young men who have no interest in intimacy at all, which is so surprising. Upwards to guys in their 30s, not just young teens. Some are
wow.
having online um, relationships. I think there was a study I read quite some time ago, a statistic that 50% of young people today will have their first sexual encounter online.
Oh, dear Lord.
Mhm, mhm. So that's sadly becoming a norm.
We've talked about this, that dopamine hit. Is it the dopamine hit that's keeping them in denial? And that's I know that's dangerous too, because you can't just take away the whole, the gaming because of the dopamine, but and they'll go through withdrawal. So let's talk about the fact that they actually are getting a drug going like racing through their body that's keeping them gaming.
Well, and for a lot of my guys who have ADHD, they're not taking medication. Some
Mm.
haven't even been diagnosed or in the process of getting an assessment done. And so they're low dopamine to begin with. So there's no greater source of dopamine. Jake says today that no matter what he does and how active his life is, Nothing he does today gives him the same dopamine hit that gaming did. Absolutely nothing. He said he's just had to learn to live with a lower level of dopamine.
Mm.
And that's fine. He's very happy with that. But if you're low dopamine, you're going to go searching for it. But also, the gaming isn't just giving them dopamine, it's giving them a feedback loop that's positive. It's giving them instant reward. It's allowing their brain to operate at 100%, which is where they're happiest. It's under pressure. So, all the things that somebody with ADHD craves is right there in the games. It's highly, highly stimulating. But once they start that level of dopamine, the big myth around gaming addiction is, well, just take it away, turn off the internet. Except what will happen because their brain is so used to that level of dopamine that for the first 5 days, the natural dopamine that their brain produces will completely stop. It will come to a halt for 5 days. That's the withdrawal symptoms. That's when they feel the most miserable. And so, if you don't know how to help them through that withdrawal, you can't just turn it off. Some kids become violent. Some kids become despondent, suicidal. It's miserable. It was a miserable time for Jake. I had to watch him 24/7 when he was going through his initial detox. They also go through that grieving period of, I don't have this thing that meant so much to me. And also, I don't have my online friends. Now I'm completely cut off from the world. Now I'm completely isolated. So that's a dangerous place to go and a dangerous way of thinking. And so we have to be very, very careful about how we introduce any kind of change to the dopamine levels of the brain.
So, for any parent listening, this is not something you suggest that they do on their own at home
No.
without someone like yourself kind of coaching them along the way.
Yeah, no, I did it on my own, but that was 2014 when it was really on anyone's radar. There wasn't a lot of help. I went on instinct and got lucky. You know, I just got lucky. I watched him very closely. I provided a lot of empathy and support, kept him busy. Um, but it was hard. And he didn't become violent with me. In situations where we've got volatility, especially kids who are ADHD, who are not usually emotionally regulated, that can heighten through gaming. That we know that the symptoms of ADHD can become worse in gaming addiction. So no, I wouldn't recommend anyone does that on their own.
Mhm. So, if cutting them off is not the answer, how do you start addressing what's really missing in their lives? The connection, the stimulation, the purpose. How do you work through that, knowing that you can't just cut them off?
Well, I look for the problem
Mm.
because, as Gabor Mate says, addiction is the solution to a problem.
Yeah.
That is the other reason you can't take it away. You take it away, the problem's still there. That was their coping mechanism. Now we need a new coping mechanism. So I look for whatever the core issue is that's driving the addictive gaming and start rewinding and working towards healing, recovering. A lot of times it's self-esteem issues. A lot of times it's awkwardness in in-person social situations. There's a lot of toxicity sometimes in the family home. Sometimes there was a trauma.
Mm.
Sometimes they've got also, anxiety or depression, other mental illnesses they're dealing with. So I'm looking at what's driving them to game. What are they hungering for in life that they think that gaming is giving them? And then start working on those issues. And then I will talk to my gamers about the positives of in-person networking versus what you're going to get online. So, for example, if I can get them working or back to school, those are environments that instantly create opportunities. And so if you're at a job and maybe it's not the job you want, I'm like, do any job. I don't care. Just get out there and get working. Because once you're in the job, somebody may see a skill that you have that you didn't really recognize that stood out. And then you'll hear things like, hey, Jake, I've noticed you're really good at blank. And I have a
Mm.
brother-in-law that's just started a business and could use somebody like you. Let me make that introduction. And that opens doors and opportunities. And for every person that you meet, they also have their own network. So you're tapping into a lot of people and a lot of opportunity. Or I'm ready to date. And so you make that statement to people, and then someone's bound to say, I have a friend that I think would be a great fit for you. I'll make that introduction. That doesn't happen online. If
Yeah.
you're unwell and you're in the hospital, your online friends are not there by your side holding your hand while you
Right.
recover from illness.
Mm.
And
You know,
that's
I,
what Jake discovered. They weren't there for those reasons. When
yeah.
Jake said, I'm leaving gaming because it's affecting my mental health in a negative way, they didn't care. They just kept saying, when are you coming back to game? Yet his in-person friends said, what can we do to help?
Mm.
I won't game around you if that will help. What kinds of activities do you need to do? Let's get together. Do you need to talk? How can I support you through this? It was a very, very different scenario in person than it was online.
Let me ask you something. When does this intense gaming start? Like, what age does it start? Because I was just thinking about something you said, and I want to ask you a question about it. But first, before I say anything, I want to ask, what is the starting age where they start getting like into this vortex of constant gaming?
Well, the average age of a video gamer that's addicted is a male between 18 and 25. So a large number of my clients are young men who have failed out the first year of college or university, or have had two or three attempts at university
Mm.
and just found themselves locked in their dorm rooms gaming and not attending classes, not doing the schoolwork. But for Jake, he started to play online multiplayer games when he was in middle school. So that would be, 11, 12, 13, because he was bullied at school. And so
Mm.
he went online and discovered that there were kids just like him, gamers. And, back when he was in middle school, gaming wasn't as popular as it is now. So he was considered a geek, a nerd,
Right.
he was different. And then he got online and went, oh, there's other geeks and nerds out there. But also, there's also kids with a whole lot of emotional issues online as well. And so he started to gravitate towards it because he found community.
Mm.
But it really wasn't until high school hit that, actually, let me back up. It wasn't until university hit that the heavy gaming started because school was just too stressful for him and he wasn't making friends. And he actually didn't think he could manage the program. He didn't feel very smart. He had come from a gifted program with a small group of kids, so he was a big fish in a small pond. And then
Mm.
suddenly he saw there was a lot of kids smarter than him. And that really tanked his academic confidence in himself. That's when he drove into the gaming in a heavier way. We didn't know that at the time because that was first year. And he came home and said it was a great year and he passed everything. But in second year, when he accidentally deregistered himself by making a late payment and panicked, that's when the gaming really got out of hand. And so I think it takes time to build. I don't think it's something that happens overnight.
Mm.
But certainly, if a child is struggling with an issue that they don't feel they are getting the help or support with, or don't feel like they have anybody to ask for help and support, they'll slowly start to drive themselves into more and more gaming if the problem doesn't get resolved.
So the reason why I asked is because I think that school, whether it's high school or first year university, college, it's very traumatizing. It's very traumatizing. So when these young adults in their 20s, you're trying to work with them and try to show that there's a life outside of their bedrooms and their gaming, they don't know about that life because they only have school to fall back on and the bullying or the trauma or the feeling really shitty about yourself at school. That's what they're going to think back they think that's what life is. But the
Mhm.
truth is that when they get out and they get a job, there's a whole other, it's a different world than now when you're starting to work. And I think that that's something that young adults don't realize that actually school is not life, and that
No.
whatever happened at school is not going to happen in real life for you because now it's just a different environment. And like Jake, when he got a taste of what it was like to actually go to work and meet a diverse group of people or like-minded in the field that he was studying, that it was a different experience. That's what I think. There's a lot of trauma that goes on in high school and first year. That's what keeps them afraid of trying the world again from a different, perspective of working, you know?
I would agree with that. And I'd also add to that that I think there's just far too much rescuing from parents. And we are not preparing our kids to live independently and go away to school. The problem-solving process is not being laid out for them. They're being told how to fix their problems.
Yeah.
They speak to their parents. This comes up a lot with my clients where they want to talk to their parents about an issue and they're either shot down with dismissiveness or judgment or don't be ridiculous, don't feel you shouldn't feel that way.
Mm,
Or they start asking a whole lot of questions because the parent's trying to formulate the answer in their head without actually helping the child work through the problem solving themselves and letting them make the best decision.
right.
Uh, and even if it's the child chooses not the best decision, they're going to learn from that as well, right?
Mhm.
Okay, that didn't work. Let's back to the drawing board. What do you think you could do next? Let's talk about this. And so, in Jean Twang's work, who's a researcher of generations,
Yes.
she believes that this generation is maturing up to 3 years behind because there's so much insular protection in the
Mm,
home. And a lot of that was caused by, 9/11 and Columbine, where we started to see the world outside of our homes as dangerous. And so we became more protective. We started driving our kids to school instead of walking. And
mm,
there was no more free range, you know, childhood and tracking on phones and, staying at home more.
mm.
And so all of that is contributing to our kids maturing much later. And so we're sending kids off to university, some 17 and 18 years old, with the maturity of a 14 and 15-year-old. And that's just a disaster waiting to happen.
100%.
We have to take a step back and start letting our kids have more agency in their decisions. And that needs to start in the early teen years, not, when they've gone off to university.
100%. I could not agree with you more. I remember when my son was gaming, and he was younger, he was in the earlier high school years. I knew that it was too much time online, but I kept saying to myself, well, at least he's safe,
Yeah,
right? We make excuses, but that safety is one of them. At least I know he's home. I have a friend that son was out and about, not in front of the screen, but like she didn't know where he was and she would panic. So
right.
I that was one of the justifications for it. It's okay, let him stay home and be in front of the screen. He's safe.
Yeah, I was submitting to my editor with my second book. I think it was my second book, might have been my first. And I said, well, at least he's not doing drugs and he's not
Right.
committing crimes and he's not drinking. And she wrote in the side edits and sent it back to me, said, this is the justification that abused women use to stay in abusive marriages. Well, at least
Wow.
he's a dad, at least he has a job. And that really hit me. I thought, of course, addiction is addiction. I
Yeah.
can't justify this addiction because he's not doing worse things.
Right. Um, there's this British author. His name is Johann Hari, and he's written several best-selling books on addiction and depression. In fact, his book, Chasing the Scream, he writes, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection.
Mhm.
According to Harry, addiction happens because someone feels isolated, lonely, or disconnected from meaningful relationships. The real solution isn't necessarily to stop the addictive behavior, but to build these healthier connections with people. So that is your ultimate goal with the young adults that you're working with and their parents, is to create these meaningful to show them that there's a world out there where they can have those meaningful connections. And I
Yeah,
think
I,
it
I rarely ever look at full detox initially with a client
okay.
because it's so dangerous, and because we haven't dug into what the problem is. Even though parents are at the point where they want to throw it out the window and they want to unplug it, that's not my first step. What I want is to help the gamer build a life outside of the gaming that becomes much more meaningful. And then the
Mm,
gaming becomes sort of a backseat thing because it is a behavioral addiction. You do not have to have full sobriety. Jake chooses sobriety because that's what works best for him. He tried harm reduction, it didn't work. But you know, you can learn to have a healthy relationship with gaming or screens while still having a life around that or outside of that. So that's
mhm,
usually my goal is to get them to, you know, get exercising. That's one of the first things. Get a win. I'm looking for small wins. You know, go to the gym. And I tell them it's not going to feel great for the first couple of weeks. It's going to feel crummy. You're going to hurt, feel the
mm,
burn. It's not going to feel natural, but give it a couple of weeks and then your body will start craving it. And your mood will elevate as a result of it. And maybe you don't have to start with a gym. Maybe you just start with 15-minute walks every day. Just get yourself moving. I just want little wins where they start to see some progress. And then let's start job searching so that we can get them an interview because that's a win. Oh, somebody actually wants to talk to me and interview me. And then
mm.
we get through the interview and they've been hired. Oh, that's another win. Oh, somebody actually thinks I'm worthy of this job. And then they start the job, the paycheck. Also, you know, that's another win. Oh, I'm getting paid for this. And then you're getting feedback about your work. So it's another win. So just all incremental little wins along the way, because those are dopamine hits on their own.
Definitely.
Um, and, you know, and they are all confidence builders as well.
Right, right, right. Um, I just read this recently and it shocked me. In 2023, 2 years ago, the US Surgeon General put out an advisory declaring that loneliness and social disconnection were a public health crisis.
Mhm.
The data is so striking. It shows that loneliness is linked to higher risks of depression, anxiety, addiction, dementia, and even premature death. So, in the context of gaming and screen time, if loneliness is that dangerous, it makes sense why young people are retreating into that world for relief. But then it becomes this vicious cycle. So, how do you help the adult child? So, you've actually started mentioning these things. We're looking at how to break that vicious cycle of loneliness. And that's,
Mhm.
and I love the fact that you're saying it's not a complete, halt. It's baby steps,
Mhm.
slowly baby steps out the door and into the world and realizing that work is nothing like school and that there are all these wonderful motivational dopamine hits that come from working and getting hired and getting paid. So, but that's the cycle. I mean, it almost feeds into itself because if they don't do it, the loneliness, it's just, but I was shocked when I read that the advisory declaring that loneliness and social disconnection is a public health crisis. I mean, that's why for me, Elaine, I feel so passionate about getting kids out of their room. I feel like there's nothing good is going to come from it. So we have to stop being so afraid of the world. We have to trust our young adults that they're going to be okay, and we cannot perpetuate this because the loneliness that's happening in that bedroom is way worse for them than facing rejection of not getting a job or dating somebody that doesn't want to date you anymore. So I have another study. In 2020, a study in addictive behaviors showed that when gaming replaces face-to-face interaction, that the loneliness and depression increase. And I know I'm bringing up these studies a lot because, like we spoke about earlier, the rat park wasn't the only one. It was just the beginning. But gaming really isn't the root problem.
No.
So I think you're right on to say to parents, don't just pull the plug, so to speak, on the gaming. Because like you said, this is a coping mechanism. There's something deeper going on. And the fact that these parents don't even want to recognize that there is a deeper problem, which means that your job is, I mean, it's a lot more than just saying, let's get them not gaming anymore. They're doing this because they're really avoiding some deeper, darker pain. But
Mhm.
in your blog post, How Isolation Can Breed Gaming Addiction, I really appreciate the suggestions that you give parents, how they can overcome this habit without dealing with the confrontation, the defiance, the denial, which is not easy. And and since I love offering actionable steps, I'd like to talk about, and you've mentioned them, but I'd like to talk about what some of the things that you've offered in your blog post, although it will be in the show notes. But can you start? You've listed five. Can you start to share some of those suggestions? Because I think they're actually amazing.
Yeah, I've got them in front of me because there's, titles and then subs under the titles. So,
Mhm.
just exploring with curiosity with your child, first of all. And back to the you can't just turn off the internet or take it away. If you start talking to them about gaming in a negative way, you will completely lose them immediately because this is a part of their culture and it's really important to them. And there's a lot they get out of gaming. If they're not addicted, you're a recreational gamer. There's lots of things that you can gain from gaming. It's a wonderful recreational thing that you bring skills to, and that can translate to other areas of your life. And so, just exploring with curiosity for me is really important. I often say to parents, ask them about their games. Ask them about the avatar they've created. You can learn a lot about who your child wants to be, not
Mm,
necessarily who they are in a game. Ask them, what's the most valuable thing that they get from gaming. I often, when I'm speaking to gamers, will ask them, what skills do you bring? And then where can you translate those skills to other parts? Because I want them to feel positive about the skills that they take into gaming. I
great
don't want to
question.
strip it down and say there's nothing good about it. That's just you're gonna lose them for sure when you do that. And ask them, what would your life look like if you didn't game for a week? What would that look like? You're going to learn how frightened they are about the outside world with that question, right? That they're going to tell you that would feel miserable. Jake and I just talked about this yesterday because COVID was so difficult. We saw a lot of isolation in COVID. And he said immediately for the first couple of weeks, isolation was kind of neat and he could focus on some at-home projects and some things that he hadn't been doing because he was already detoxed at that point. And then by week 3, the little voice in his brain was saying, play a game. Come on, it's been
Mm,
a while, you'll be fine. And he recognized immediately that was a dangerous place. And he knew the problem was that he needed community. And so for the first 2 months, he came home and lived with my husband and I. And we created our own bubble. And then he created a bubble with a friend of his and his wife that were in a house together. And so he spent some time with them. And then eventually he moved to the neighborhood his brother lives in because his brother has an autoimmune disorder, so he had to have a bubble as well, and he couldn't travel on transit
mm,
when right. So he knew immediately, I need community and I've got to have to create community. And so what's that look like for your child if they don't have games? How would they create community? The second one is well, it's sort of the same thing, validate their current world before the limits of it. So talk to them about the importance of being in person, right? Oxytocin is produced by the brain when you're in person.
that's
That
right.
doesn't happen when you're online, and that helps to teach you about trust and bonding
Yep.
and why that's important. And body language and what it feels like to be in the presence, the energy that you get from being with other people. Those are important things to talk to your kids about that do not exist online. And we don't want to say that in a, don't do this, do this, but both are important. Yeah, we know your online friends. I mean, everybody has online friends today anyway.
Right.
That's normal. Even I have online friends. I don't play video games with them. But it's important to have both. How can we introduce both instead of one or the other?
Yeah.
So that's super important. And then, like I said before, create those small wins. Those are
Right.
super important. And then find other activities that you can be doing that are still kind of relatable to video gaming, I often encourage Dungeons and Dragons or any role-playing games or strategy games, board games that are strategy based, escape rooms. A lot of my young people are into modeling, Lego, Warhammer, those sorts of things. So it's still, you know, what we would consider geeky activities, but that's okay. Comic books, and then creating like scavenger hunts or going out on hikes and having a list of things you need to find and take pictures of. So you still have your digital device with you, but you're using it for photographs instead of gaming. Um, you know, get your kids to cook with you. Because when you're doing an activity with your child, they'll talk more through an activity than if you're just sitting face to face. So,
Mm.
and then that teaches them a skill as well. Um, and then get their input on the cooking, right? Because they're on YouTube. They see these videos, right? What do you want to make? And how do you think we should make it? Should we look for a YouTube video to make it with and follow? So that is another area that we want to look at. And then what we talked about before, we can talk to them about the rat park experiment and see how they can see the difference between being isolated in their room versus being out with people and how would that feel. Um, and then how do we create a richer um, rat park environment for them, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't include being in their room.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I want to talk about modeling. I'm a firm believer that kids pay more attention to what we do than what we say or what we tell them, which just means that parents really need to be role models for their kids, even when they're adults. Do you see this in your coaching? Do parents with active lives, whether it's they're playing sports, golf, tennis, working out, being social, having friends over for dinner or game night, does the lifestyle of these more active parents, does it have any influence whatsoever on these kids?
Yeah, often in the family situations that I'm looking at, there are parents that are not having full lives, that don't go out, that are staying home and watching television or they're on their own screens. And so I do bring that up and say, are you also modeling that friendships are important in your life once you become an adult? And, what kinds of things do you need to be doing to show your child that this is important? Or I have the opposite, where the parents are very athletic and involved in a lot of things, and then that sets the bar too high for the
Mm.
child.
Can't win.
Yeah, so finding the balance is difficult,
Yeah.
but also there's a lot of kids that don't want to be involved in sports, that sports don't interest them, and that's okay. Team sports, not your thing. I'm fine with that.
Hmm.
Jake was never really a team sport guy. His brother was, but he would do archery and he would do snowboarding and he would play singles in tennis, right? So those were solo kind of things where
Right.
he was challenging himself, and that was okay. He's found rock climbing now as his activity. And he loved when he was in university in the last year, he joined Muay Thai, which is a martial art. And
Okay.
so I say to my guys, find something that's active. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sport. If you like hiking, if you want to go cycling, or you want to go on a skateboard, I don't care. Do anything to get your body actively moving. But also, if that doesn't interest you either, let's look at the arts, right? If I have somebody that it really enjoyed drama when they were a youngster in school, well, go find a local theater. And maybe you're not going to be acting, you're going to start maybe as a stagehand, but just to get back into that environment of like-minded people to see if that's an area that you want to start working in. Make your own music. Right, DJing. There's all kinds of activities that they can be doing. Learn an instrument.
Mm.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be all about sports. It can be whatever you're interested in, art classes, arts and craft, whatever it is that floats your boat. I say go do it. Go find something. And it might take you trying a few different things before you land on the thing that you go, oh yeah, this is what I can do still, or new. Doesn't have to be something you did before. Um,
So
Yeah,
a lot
I
of
think,
parents will say that they can't force their kid to do these things, but is it how do you do that? I mean, is it because you're the therapist and you're kind of expecting that, the next time you speak to them, they will have made a couple of changes or made some efforts? Like, what is it what is it that you're doing differently that you're getting them to try these things that the parents are saying, I've tried everything and nothing works? Because we're going to hear that. We're going to hear parents going, that doesn't work. I've said it, I've suggested, nothing works. They don't want to stop. But you're suggesting it. Is that the difference when it's coming from a third party? They're more willing to do the things that you're suggesting?
well, parents are outdated people to a youngster. What do they know? Right? Why would I listen to them? They
Right?
don't understand my world.
Right.
Somebody objective,
Mm.
yes, they'll often listen to. I don't generally make suggestions. I
Okay.
give choices.
Love
And I
that.
and I tell parents they need to give choices. Don't say, "Hey, do you want to go out cycling with mom and dad tonight?"
Mm.
Say, "I'd really love to spend some time with you this week." And I was thinking we could either maybe go for a bike ride together, or do you feel like going out and doing an escape room? You decide. And
Elaine,
then,
I did
okay,
choices for my kids their whole life.
right.
Right.
Yeah. And I have this night available or this night available.
Mm.
You choose. And then let's look at the time. So I'm available from this time to this time. Which time works for you? So now they've made the decision about what they're doing. They've been able to make the decision about what day, and they've even gotten to choose the time. So they feel like they had agency in the decision making. It wasn't you saying, let's do this, or why don't you do this?
Yeah.
When someone starts a sentence with should, you should stop listening. So don't ever start any of your sentence with your kids with the words you should.
Yeah.
But I ask, okay, what are the things that you used to do that you might find you'll still be interested now, or something similar to that that
Hmm.
you might find interesting? Or what's a new thing that you've never tried that you think you might want to try? Um, so we have conversations about where do you want to make changes in your life? What's the barrier to those changes? And what's the first step we can take towards creating change?
Mm.
And then they get to decide what's the first step I can take. Oh, well, I could go for a walk. A lot of kids are willing to go for a walk before they're willing to hit the gym. Gyms are not social places anyway, and they're quite intimidating.
Yeah.
And so you're better off to just be out, maybe join a hiking group instead. But you have to be
Hmm.
careful of that too, because, if it's daytime, it can be a lot of people that are much older than you. Probably easier to find a cycling club in the evening. I often tell them to go to recreation centers where there's, rec volleyball or basketball or pickleball, and do it in the evening, not in the day, because you're more likely to run into younger people.
So you're not meeting with resistance because of your approach, because of how you're being so open-ended. You're letting them tell you what they want to do, and you're giving them options.
Oh, sometimes I'm met with resistance.
Oh, you are? Okay. Um,
They're holding on to that addiction pretty tight. And
mm,
also, remember, I'm working with kids that are neurodiverse, and often social interaction is not comfortable for them. So a
okay.
lot of times we have to work on that, how they can, so a little bit of exposure therapy of let's try a little bit, stepping out of your comfort zone. What's your worst fear? What's the worst thing that can happen? How are you going to handle that worst thing that could happen? Because really, we're never afraid of what's going to happen. We're afraid of how we're going to handle what's going to happen.
Mm.
So if we've got some good coping strategies in place for how we're going to handle adversity, we're more likely to be able to go comfortably and try things.
Right.
So a lot of times it's just about, I have difficulty making friends. Okay, let's talk about why. Is it you have difficulty striking up conversations? A lot of my kids are quite deep thinkers and like to have really meaty, meaningful conversations. And
Mm.
a lot of times they're not meeting like-minded young people. They're frivolous partiers that you don't want to have those kinds of conversations. And so, what kind of activities can we get them involved in where they're going to meet like-minded people and have those deeper conversations?
Right. So the bottom line is, and I really want parents to sit with this, um, real life connections matter. along with the in-person stimulation and physical activity, whether that's done on your own or with a group. But I often ask myself, why do we let this happen? Like, why do we let them just game all night or sit on their screens all day? Kind of going back a little bit, but I really want parents to ask themselves, what are you afraid of? What is stopping you? And is it because we're too tired to, I mean, they're gaming at night, so we're too tired to say, stop gaming, or why don't you do something else? Or we don't want the fight, right? There's always that, like, they're so combative because they think you're pulling them away. And or we don't have other options. I mean, you've given such great options though. So after this, I'm sure they'll be like, oh yeah, I never thought about that. Or we tell ourselves it's just a phase. But the truth is, again, I really want parents to sit with this, that avoiding the conflict only makes this problem bigger. So I think our kids deserve more in life. And that's what I feel so strongly about why I do this and speak to people like yourself. Because whatever is going on behind those closed doors, whatever they're doing, they're not living. And so nothing good will happen when they're in that room. So, Elaine, I always want to leave on a positive note, and your suggestions have been amazing. But what are some of the changes that parents can expect to see, or that these young adults can expect to experience when you get them away, even if it's less away, but away from their online screening, videos, scrolling, whatever? What's the light at the end of the tunnel that parents can kind of, look forward to?
They're going to start living again.
Mm.
They're going to start to feel confident. They're going to feel joy, like true joy in their lives.
Oh, I just got the shivers.
Mm, yeah. And I know what you're saying. Parents often are very afraid of their kids, and some can be quite aggressive, especially when you're dealing with, late teens and young adult men. It's scary. It's very scary. A lot
Mm.
of parents just want to be their kid's friend and they don't want to disrupt the relationship. But if your kid's addicted and isolated in their room, you're not having a healthy relationship anyway.
No.
Uh, in my interview with Jake yesterday, I'll go back to that. I said, if you could go back to when you were isolated and addicted so badly, what would you say to that Jake? And he said, nothing. I wouldn't change any of that because I needed to go through that experience and go through recovery to become the person I am. And I wouldn't have listened to myself anyway. I needed you to force me to look at it and force me to detox. I was
Oh,
never going to do it.
I think we could end on that. I love that. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for coming back
Mm.
and for us to, dig a little bit deeper into what this all means. I'm sure that parents will get a lot out of this conversation. And I want to end on that because I've said it enough times that I believe this is going to be a wake up call for how bad isolation is. Um, but I love the fact that Jake had that epiphany. I just love that. So we're going to end on that note, and I will definitely be, giving all of your contact information and that blog post, which I think was really well done, well written, and
Thank you.
I think parents will just go back to it. So thank you, Elaine, for coming back, and let's keep this going. It was episode whatever 24 and now we're at whatever 40 something, so I'll see you in 20 episodes and we'll talk about your book, your next book.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thanks for having me, Sherry.
Oh,
It's
it's a
a pleasure.
pleasure. And I one day really want to meet Jake.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
we'll make that happen.
All right. Thanks, Elaine.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope today's episode gave you valuable insights and actionable steps that will help you guide your young adult to launch successfully into adulthood. If you found this topic helpful, feel free to leave a comment and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Leaving a 5-star review helps us reach more parents who are dealing with the same issues. And if there's something you want to ask me, I invite you to join Launch Advice, my weekly publication where I answer one question from parents just like you. It's free advice that will appear in your inbox Probably when you need it the most. Just click Launch Advice in the show notes and don't forget to email me your confidential question. And remember, no one ever said parenting is easy, especially when you're raising an adult. Talk to you soon.